Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 7th of October 2018. There was a movie, a comedy called Groundhog Day, where the main character, who plays an arrogant egotist basically, keeps waking up with the same things happening in the same order every day until he starts to understand that he is a disliked character, an arrogant, nasty character, and he starts to learn some humility, and eventually he gets it kind of right before he can move on out of this loop, this constant loop, and go into the future. So that was a story about him changing his personality, basically. In our reality, we're in Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day is when you see war after war after war, planned, executed in the same fashion, using the same propaganda techniques upon the public of massive diversions into soap opera drama, basically. While the real movers and shakers are making coalitions with governments across the world for the next war, then you got to understand that you don't remember. You're in a form of amnesia in your Groundhog Day. And that's what we have, is amnesia. They'll change the slight order of things. They'll change the terminology often used, such as in Gulf War I, of course, they had their own system of weapons of mass destruction. You had Desert Storm and so on. And you also have the demonization of your enemy as the most hideous character who's ever walked the planet, basically. Always, doesn't matter who it is. I can remember as far back as Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan, of course. I mean, all people who are presidents or prime ministers read scripts written by other people. It's interesting to see the same scripts being actually read by different people throughout your lifetime. But they had, in Reagan's day, the great evil empire of, I think it was basically Iran was one of them. And it's so comical in a sense because at the time the US was selling drugs for guns and so on and vice versa from Latin America, and even selling drugs into the United States and selling it to the youngsters in the United States. Can you believe your government's doing that sort of stuff, eh? And that all came out during the hearings about it all. And Oliver North, of course, was quizzed and so on. And his job, apart from many other aspects of changing the system, was to basically, if needed or called upon, he would change or suspend the Constitution and the rights and freedoms of citizens of the US. That was back then. So we have the same things happening over and over under different guises. And when George Bush Jr. got in, you find that it was already planned, this whole war across the Middle East. And they had their teams. There have been so many good documentaries put out by those involved in it, in fact, as workers behind the scenes for the Bush government, basically, who admitted that all they wanted to hear was all the positive reasons for going to war with the countries they selected. And anything that was negative or negated the reasons for going into countries and attacking them was to be thrown out. And it was exposed by those who were involved in the think tanks working on it at the time for the government. But reality doesn't matter, isn't it? I think Stanley Monteith used to say that reality doesn't matter, and that illusion in the system that we're in, illusion is usually king. And that's what it is. George Orwell said it something similar. He said that in an age of universal deceit, speaking the truth is considered an act of treason. And we've never been in such incredible mind control as we are today. The PNAC group, the Project for New American Century, published their agenda and the countries they wanted taken out in the 1990s. And the neocons were well understood why back then and then today as well. Well, actually, forget them again. It's the same bunch back in, some of them at least, with the same goals. And they're continuing the same list that was drafted up back then that General Clark talked about on Democracy Now! They never changed their agenda. The rich and powerful never changed their agenda. Never. And it was so amazing to see, again, the first attack in the Middle East on Iraq in 1991, I think it was. And how everybody's forgotten that. And then for about 10 years, they had the no-fly zone over Iraq. They starved folk to death. They kept medicines from going in. Madeleine Albright said it was quite worthwhile to have 500,000 children and women die for lack of food, nourishment, and medicine. And we forget that so happily, don't we? Because we don't like bad news and unpleasant things. And then you find, as I say, that they give you 10 to 15 years generally between these wars that they give you. And people have forgotten already that you've really been at war continuously across the Middle East, even before the 1990s, but continuously from that then on, with the invasion, basically. Oh, sorry, peacekeeping force. Yeah. We don't have soldiers, we have peacekeepers who look like soldiers, carry weapons the same as soldiers, but really they're peacekeepers, you see. It's all perception management. Excuse my voice too, because the weather's changing. Suddenly got awfully cold, and it's very damp too. And I think there's a lot of really nasty stuff in the air outside too. And I was outside most of the day. Plus it was awfully wet as well. But anyway, getting back to the story here, perception management is used on us all. And today we have the biggest drama, big drama, with what's happening with the blocking of appointments in the US government. I've said before, government must, first and foremost, protect itself. Every government's the same. And they'll do that by any means possible. So really, if people are trying to stop the workings of government, the government would react and have them all jailed. And if they're not, it means it's accepted by government. There's a different agenda on the go. But it's the greatest distraction, like a soap opera with Kavanaugh and so on. And Pompeo, meanwhile, is across Europe getting together the coalition. All agreed and signed on to the coalition that if they can say that Syria uses chemical weapons, once more, of course, even though we've found out before in the past that the other groups have had chemical weapons and they used them, not the Assad group. It makes no difference. Truth doesn't matter when there's an agenda afoot. So they give themselves a reason to invade, of course, and if they're all on board claiming that Syria uses chemical weapons, even though most of it's all over, of course, doesn't make any difference either, that why would they use chemical weapons when they've already been warned if they did use them, they would have an invasion. So it makes no sense, except that they're going to use the excuse again to go in there and finish off. And they want a base as well, and they want to go across into Iran too. It's so in your face today. It really is. But most folk, again, have already forgotten the first one in 1991, with all the excuses then. And the grabbing of oil fields and so on by the West, by corporations. They've already forgotten 9/11 happened in 2001. And that's where they give spaces between them, you see. And because most of them have forgotten, and a lot have grown up in that time period, I mean, it was about 20 years' time almost. You've got folk going into their 20s now who really haven't known a system other than this system, which is a different system of mass surveillance and no privacy. That's their reality. They think it's normal. So therefore, we're going through, as I say, perception management by big players, big heavy players, and they know exactly what they're doing. News, therefore, is a production today. It's a massive distraction because they don't want you to really be watching what really is happening. And you have to get off of the television, of course, because TV will take the simplest, most popular and authorized propaganda and keep repeating it over and over. But if you get into some of the old newspapers or whatever, they're still left out there and still working. And even ones that are full of propaganda, it's good to read the propaganda and how it's being done. and what they want you to believe. And again, it's like Groundhog Day. It's the same stuff, same lines, same reasons, blah, 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 regardless of who the enemy happens to be. The great Satan. The evil empire. Remember all that? So anyway, you've got Secretary Pompeo, and it says he announced Wednesday that the US is terminating a 1955 treaty with Iran after the United Nations top court used that treaty to order the US to ease some of its sanctions on the regime. The International Court of Justice ruled earlier Wednesday that the US must lift sanctions that affect the import of humanitarian goods and products and services linked to the safety of civilian or civil aviation. And it's the same thing as the Iraq war, remember? They had the no-fly zone and they stopped all aid getting in, including medicines and all the rest of it. Same thing. For the same winners, there'll be winners out of it. And we're supposed to stand by and say nothing, of course. Most of it will. Because they can't believe their own governments and their own media is simply repeating propaganda. They can't believe that. People who you're trained to believe are figures of authority on news and television especially are often important. They're paid high money, big money, because you might grow up with them your whole life watching them as your great-granddad, and he wouldn't lie to you. That's why they do that. Anyway, it's got the ICJ ruling from The Hague, is it? It's in a preliminary decision that the US must remove by means of its choosing any impediments arising from sanctions that affect exports to Iran of medicine. So the US rather than comply, and you have to wonder, what is the US? What is any country for that matter these days? The corporations. Who owns the corporations? You may get shocked to find out that you got different owners today. Really? And it says the US had argued that the sanctions cannot be challenged at the ICJ because it's a matter of national security. So national security gives you the right to do mass murder by starvation, if need be, or by withholding medicines, or withholding anything for that matter. War is war. This is why I don't want to use the term war, so it doesn't go down in the history books that the US declared another war on so-and-so. That's why. Very simple. And that's what Orwell knew, as I say, with his statement that in a time of universal deceit is considered treason, perhaps. It could be terrorism too, of course, to say the truth. You're supposed to all go along with the lies, which makes you complicit when you know what it's about. You're complicit in really what's going to happen to other people. Terrible, terrible things. For agendas which you really, really will never know about. It's never to do with what they tell you it's about. Never. The first casualty of war is the truth. Very old saying. That's how they deal with things they don't like, is simply pull out of any agreements. As they send their missionary, Mr. Pompeo, the war, I call them missionaries, because they're there to preach the reasons why they should all sign in a coalition for the list of targets they still want to take out. And money will change hands and agreements were made, and folk who are the CEOs of corporations, which are called countries, will get well paid when these things happen for being on board and taking all of the sheep along with them. And it's always the sheep that pays for all, isn't it? So Trump is UN Security Council. What an amazing, and the terminology never changes. You think it's old-fashioned at times. Trump at the United Nations Council. Syria's butchery is enabled by Russia and Iran. Back in the 90s on a show, and I mentioned the whole Cold War thing and how it was so lucrative when Russia was the Soviet Union. And the corporations they could build new different missiles every month and say, oh, it's obsolete a month later. We need a new one, a new type. And it was all research and development money, as they called it. And the taxpayers funded it all. Billions and billions of dollars or pounds or whatever it happened to be. Great profits for stuff that was never meant to be used. You didn't have to even prove that it worked naturally. It's great, great business. And as it says, so Trump's at the United Nations Security Council, and you got serious butchery is enabled by Russia. And I said that if they need run out of enemies to sell stuff and validate the reasons for keeping spending on the military and the war efforts, they'll revive the bad bear of Russia. And that's what they're doing now too, of course. Of course they are. And of course they want to go after Iran too, which tells you there's the neocons behind it, really. And Netanyahu accuses Iran of concealing nuclear material for a weapons program. Remember before, about a couple of years ago, he had the pictures of the round bomb with the fuse in it, and it was lit. And back then, that was a terrible thing. Yeah. I can remember in Gulf War I, when eventually they changed their sights from Afghanistan and convinced the public that it was temporarily, that it was Iraq that was behind 9/11. And during the inquiry afterwards, of course, once I had it all over and done with, Bush said, "Oh, I never said that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11. You see, he's just a bad man, and the world's better off without him." Well, what kind of law is that? But anyway, you're getting the same things today, of course, same excuses, etc. And the ramping up of the terrible enemies, the great Satans of all mankind. And it'll get worse and worse until they get what they want. And that we've never had such terrible enemies, etc., etc. Yeah. And the same players, we've got Netanyahu. I can remember back when 2001 happened, in 2003 they invaded Iraq as well. And they were told by Israel, don't stop, look them up yourself in their headlines and in their papers. Don't stop, go all the way through into Syria, start in Iraq and continue right through, and then through Libya and blah, blah, blah. Well, they took out Libya eventually. If you remember that, it's not long ago. Same list. You're living through an agenda with a list. And the reasons you're given are never, ever, ever what they tell you. Most propaganda is not meant for any enemy. It's meant for their own populations to believe. And again, too, Germany, US agree to the need to prevent chemical weapons attack in Syria. So there's your headline right there. That's the reason it's going to give for it. And they will. They'll make it happen. And where it happens or not doesn't matter. They'll say it happened. And away you go. And Netanyahu also claims that Iran has a secret atomic warehouse. Wow. Secret atomic warehouse. So it really is, it's like Groundhog Day, isn't it? Over and over and over. Your whole life long. Pretty well. And you never get told the truth. You're never told about all the big players who end up getting territory and resources for nothing. You're never told about the taxpayers that they've conned and lied to, picking up the tab for all. You're told nothing at all, are you, really? Remember, too, in Operation Iraqi Freedom, when they invaded, they weren't invading, they were bringing you freedom with peacekeepers. And they had pictures, years ago, pictures of some of the operations, and you would see these big, massive black plumes of smoke all over the place in the desert in Iraq, because the US were told to bomb and destroy these wells, to blow them up with their refineries, which were old. No kidding you. That was published eventually, because they were old, and they wanted to get reconstruction going by blowing them up during the invasion time. And the US taxpayers would pay for brand new refineries for these private corporations to take over. And I don't try to get people outraged about anything, because I know there's no point. Mind control is a perfect system today for most people. And like all weapons, mind control is meant to get the maximum effects on the most people it can affect at one time, knowing some will escape. Not many, but some will. There are so many articles you could read, actually, and I won't actually either, because reality is an incredible thing. It's so the most abused abused thing in reality is our sanity, constantly. When you think of all the neuroscientists, the psychologists, the behaviorists, scientists, all working for your governments and agencies to use you like a machine. Complete disregard of your right to your own thought and coming to your own opinions. Complete disregard. And they keep telling you with the propaganda that you're free. You got to stand and wonder at all this. Look at it. It's incredible. Incredible. You're free. Like Bertrand Russell said in a couple of his books, he said the same thing over and over. He said the people believe their government is the best one in the world, and that their country is, and that their healthcare system is, because the government will constantly tell them so. Repetition. It's astonishing. More so to me, because I read all the articles, probably thousands over the years, on the air. On my own shows, and other folks' shows too. Where it was admitted by the group behind Tony Blair that they brought in the heads of oil companies in Europe and Britain, and they decided to divvy up the different oil fields and refineries in Iraq before it all happened. Whereas the public are given a simple propaganda, oh, a bad, terrible man killing his own people, yada, yada, yada. Meanwhile, the West were starving them. We were starving them out of existence. Literally starving them. But we were good, though, doing that. You should really think about the fact that your own governments, and I'm talking about them all, that treat you this way by literally employing professional liars for propaganda purposes, have absolutely no respect for you at all. Utter disregard of you, your rights, your humanity even. You're an animal to them all, to be trained for a purpose which rewards them financially. Why can't a psychopath run this system? For profit. And you realize when you go along with it all too, these same people are, and they're already doing that now actually, are convincing you that maybe there's too many of you. And they do it awfully well, you must admit. Britain's probably the best of all, I think, with the BBC. They really, really do awfully well. Convincing you how to change your attitudes towards all kinds of things. And embrace the new, whatever it happens to be, even though it's 180 degrees from yesterday's new. Even though your own sensibilities tell you it's wrong. Now, a few folk have noticed the different techniques that, like an avalanche, really, launched upon the public in the propaganda efforts of modernity. Recently, too. The old style, the traditional style of trying to give you, even if it was lies or not, just here's a fact lie, whatever it happened to be, are pretty well gone. And the new technique, after doing all their studies in PSYOP operations, have shown that you can create a form of cognitive dissonance when you give two opposing reasons for things in the same articles. And you'll look up this, for instance, here in Wikipedia. A double bind is an emotionally distressing dilemma in communication in which an individual or group receives two or more conflicting messages. It's dialectic. And one message negates the other. It cancels it out. This creates a situation in which a successful response to one message results in a failed response to the other, and vice versa, so that the person will automatically be wrong regardless of response. Clever, eh? The double bind occurs when the person cannot confront the inherent dilemma and therefore can neither resolve it nor opt out of the situation. It was first described by Gregory Bateson and his colleagues in the 1950s, often utilized as a form of control without open coercion. You think you make your own decisions because you get confused. The use of confusion makes them both difficult to respond to as well as to resist. A double bind generally includes different levels of abstraction in the order of messages, and these messages can either be stated explicitly or implicitly within the context of the situation, or they can be conveyed by tone of voice or body language. Further complications arise when frequent double binds are part of an ongoing relationship to which the person or group is committed. This is very superficial, this explanation, but there's tremendous data available actually if you dig into it, if you really want to know how your mind is, how you reach what you think are your conclusions. You've been guided, nudged the whole way. And so it says here, while it's true that the core of the double bind is two conflicting demands, the difference lies in how they are imposed upon the subject, what the subject's understanding of the situation is, and who or what imposes these demands upon the subject. Unlike the usual no-win situation, the subject has difficulty in defining the exact nature of the paradoxical situation in which he or she is caught. The contradiction may be unexpressed in its immediate context and therefore invisible to external observers, only being evident when a prior communication is considered. And it goes on and on. So really, you're being manipulated all the time. And I've noticed that more and more in this last 6 months or so. These incredible contradictions in the same stories. Deliberately inserted, obviously, either from psychological operations forces or people from those very organizations inside the media themselves. Yeah, that's quite something. But we have that all through society today and all through media. Britain's doing the same thing with everything, all these different articles, different contradictory opinions. Till you can't, you'll give up eventually and take the easy way out, which is the one they'll offer at the end. You're guided the whole way. Clever, eh? It's quite clever. Also wanted to mention too, all the toys which they already have in weapons. And the fact that some of the toys they don't want to deploy because they're far cheaper to use. Here's one of them here, for instance. And I'll put this whole article up too, by the way. And it's called "These are the most game-changing weapons of the 21st century" from Business Insider. I'll put that up, a link up for that. And it's worth reading through. But you'll see in it, they give you the cost of using a laser weapon to hit an aircraft, for instance, which is be about $1, it says, the cost of it. For just an actual use of it, which I guess is the sudden burst it gives out. That's how much it costs, compared to the millions it costs for a single missile. So they don't really want to use them unless they really had to. They'd rather fire off the missiles. But they give you different hypersonic weapons, of course. There's a big one too. DARPA is involved in everything. The same group that was called ARPA before the D was added, and gave you the internet because they're already using it in the Cold War. It was never free, never ever. But I'll put that up there too, because they really want to start selling a lot more weaponry. Peace is no good for those massive profits. And the banks like war too, because they have to lend out big time for all the weapon that's being purchased and then replacing it as it's getting used. That's the beauty of disposable weaponry. You fire it off, then you need new ones. Good, eh? I'll put another one up here too, to do with other kinds of weaponry. There's Gizmodo, that was the a site or a paper that wrote about Russia and America being uneasy pals for a while, but that could all go down the drain in a microwaved hurry. It talks about Russians testing a weapon capable of causing extreme pain and mind control. And again, use the Russian zombie thing in it too. But you've got to remember that there's articles long before this was published, and I read them myself, in fact, to do with the weaponry of the West, and had little documentaries on it, in fact, on television years and years and years ago, where they showed you them using these thermal weapons on people, supposedly disperse the crowds. However, they could turn up into higher frequencies and fry you, literally. Absolutely fry you. Very quickly, too. Which reminds me of a documentary made after the last lot of wars around Iraq, etc., where they found, they call it mummified bodies buried in a certain area. But they were tiny, they were small. They weren't babies. And they were, what kind of weaponry they said caused this? But some of the people who remember the Americans bringing in these big machines on vehicles at the time and telling people to drive in certain routes, etc., being used on them, they said it was used on people, and that the high thermal energy not only cooked them but shrunk them. Yeah, I'm talking about like small or smaller, 4 feet, 4.5 feet mummies, mummified bodies. They also had the really odd ones. It was surgeons in the hospital talking about it in Iraq when a bus pulled up, and everybody in it, including the driver, had these massive slices on them. There was no marks outside the vehicle. They showed penetration via the skin of the vehicle. There was no chaos inside of people killing each other with knives or anything. It was incredible, deep, clean, zigzag cuts on most of the fuel. And some folk had whole limbs missing off them. And parts of them were even stuck to the roof inside the ceiling of the bus. But I do remember, again, this American vehicle with a kind of big antenna on top. Most folk shy away from articles like this because they can't handle the nastiness of it. Well, what do you think war is? And when you think what war is, and you say it was really evil and rotten and terrible and inhumane, and it is mad. I mean, it's called organized insanity and authorized insanity to go and slaughter people. But what do you think these people who plan it all and who are so excited about testing the new weaponry in war fields, and they know there'll be no follow-up to it, no matter how horrific the weaponry is, there's no follow-up. So they can get away with testing it out in live combat situations. So what do you think of these characters that gather statistics, plan it all in advance, and are all excited at observing the effects of it all? In the past few weeks, I've mentioned the nudge units, as they call themselves, psychological operations via basically control of internet, etc., where they study you. Everybody's getting studied all the time. And these are like spy agencies, you might call them spy agencies, governmental quiet agencies, yada, yada, yada. And foreign ones too, because it's handed out to other companies abroad to study us too. We're so bought and sold, aren't we? Our thoughts are bought and sold all the time. And we're studied like little test rats in a laboratory. We're not paid for it, of course. We pay for our own chains. We pay for everything that's done to us. And to give you the occasional bit, no doubt for most folk who are into the internet, little things that appease them, either sexually, such as pornography or something like that, well, they spy on everything you're doing. And you're trained to think, well, it's worth it. Is it? Is it really worth it? Really? Really? And what is the final game to conclude basically on this agenda? Think about it. We're constantly getting tested like rats and mice. And so you have the Moscow at one point accused the US of developing a bioweapon on its border. Now, you can go into all sides, all groups, all countries, and find similar articles, regardless of where the country happens to be. And it said that accused the US of a secret facility in a former Soviet satellite state to develop biological weapons that will target Russia. And this article is a recent one, actually. There's older ones here too. But then you have the same things from America or Britain blaming Russia for doing the same kind of things. And China, and no doubt China too. Everybody does this stuff. Everybody. Not saying it's right at all. But again, it's lucrative once again. And we live in an age of scientific dictatorship, in a sense, where those who are even appointed, and you think they're elected, but appointed to be rulers over you, and you think that leaders that are appointed leaders, not elected really, as far as I'm concerned, because they all toe the line. They do. And they do what they're told. The scripts are written for them. And they'll take the whole countries into war quite happily, obviously. I've never heard one yet with the coalitions backing out and saying, I'm really ashamed of this, or I'm horrified. Never ever. Look at Tony Blair, the one-man band, who was well picked for his position long before he became Prime Minister in Britain. And if the public think they put him in, well, think again. The richest people in the country put him in. The one-man band for a war across the Middle East, on behalf of America too, of course. Call it America, but it's the US, and well, Canada's involved too. Every country's on board with it. Isn't that rather odd in itself? Like that, there's no people. You think in a free society, anywhere in any country, don't you think you'd have different opinions as to what you should do or go to war or not, and have the authority to stop it? But there's not, is there? No, they sign on like it's all legality. Why do you think they get lawyers for everything? Why do you think so many of these politicians are lawyers? Law has nothing to do with morality, remember. Plato talked about that, and others too. It's simply the morality of the time which the owners and rulers want you all to follow. For the elite's point of view, for their benefit, not for yours. So they can change it anytime they want. And that's what tells you that once they sign on to these agreements, if so-and-so uses this chemical weapon, we'll all have to go in a coalition and bomb them into the Stone Age, like all the other countries who have done it too. And look at the face of Europe has completely changed forever with mass migration. Not just of refugees, so they're using that, but from all over Africa too. A lot of goals are being accomplished using this as an excuse, obviously. Obviously. So why would your country want to finish every other country off that you have, say in Europe? Would you stay in those countries that are targeted to get bombed and put in the Stone Age? Or would you also join the migrants and get out? Of course you're going to get out. Everybody's getting nudged and prompted to do the save yourself sort of thing. Yeah. So there's a much, much bigger agenda here than what they're telling you. A group at the top who obviously owns the planet want all this to happen, including the massive, massive, massive migration across the planet. The whole world is to be flattened in a sense, and to be equally poor down the road, not far from now. And in a state of chaos and confusion and gang violence and all the rest of it, they will come. And it's already here in some places. And your world police state will be enforced, and everybody will be to speak under the gun. Just like Orwell talked about in his book 1984. And you have the combination of the two, which is 1984, with the jackboot standing on a human face forever, stomping on it. And you have the Brave New World scenario going on at the same time. In the Brave New World scenario, everyone who's totally conditioned in, say, civil service and through all media, they're all the same, like clones of each other. They're all PC, politically correct, etc. all the time. And they say it all with a smiley face, don't they? What everyone noticed, I think, or a lot of folk noticed, with the 9/11 deal going down, and then suddenly, before the smoke was even cleared, the shout was for their main enemy that they wanted to wipe out before it all happened, was Saddam Hussein. They wanted him wiped out. Oh, and they said it's probably not him, it's probably the other one. It's a Saudi one. Oh my God, it's Osama bin Laden. Ooh. Before the smoke was cleared, it was Osama bin Laden. Ooh. And immediately the wars are now, even though they had troops ready to go in there before the towers went down, the West had troops ready to go into Afghanistan. All came out at the time. And then they changed the sights to Iraq, as I say, the next part on the list. They had nothing to do with it. Groundhog Day. One thing's for sure, though, the Western countries, they're already broke. Everybody's broke, supposedly. And you'll notice that your cash is getting worth less and less with what it can buy by the week, not the month. And we already had the so-called bank crash of 2008. Then the wars, ongoing wars, and then massive refugee crisis, or migrant, call it what you want, or what your masters want you to call it. But and the cost of putting up people and paying for it all is phenomenal. It's a war in itself, isn't it, really? And just paying for it all. And it's all borrowed money, which everyone has to pay off eventually. The currency, as I say, is already worth nothing at all, and getting worse all the time. So look at all the different agendas, or parts of the same agenda perhaps, that'll be fulfilled with this next ongoing big war. The face of Europe, just forget it altogether. You have something completely different. We already have that, in fact, with different gangs all over Europe and in Britain and so on. And forget the crime. Forget the housing millions of people who need all kinds of help and aid, etc. With social work departments thriving. They love this kind of stuff. And the psychologists galore and so on and so on. But the rest of the public have to pay for all this in many different ways. It's a war agenda, this, isn't it? It's a war. It's not just a war across the targeted countries of the physical hammering of it with weaponry, but it's a war on all the rest of them that takes the fallout. So that don't think that there's a few people. This is a big agenda here. Big agenda. It's completely. I mean, can you imagine? Who would have believed some years ago that you would have police in major cities in Europe, like London, carrying machine guns? It would never. It's completely incomprehensible to people not so long ago that would ever happen. It could never happen. And the whole point of the British bobbies, they called the cops at one time, was an agreement that they had with the crooks. Anybody caught at one time using, not so long ago too, using any kind of weapons on the public and on the police, and when the police were in pursuit, for instance, were often punished, put it that way, by the criminals themselves, other criminals. Because they didn't want a system with armed police either. And when they got caught by the police, they say it was a fair cop. That's where the term comes from. A fair catch. He was copped, you see. But now, forget it. You've got everyone being trained. Everyone's being trained. Pedestrians, all kinds. That this is normal. Machine guns in your streets are normal. For your own safety. Well, who broke your safety? Who broke it all? Who made this situation plausible that you're seeing in front of you? And they're going to do it again. Where's the big armies of protesters that used to march in the streets during the Cold War? Well, see, the followers don't organize. They simply follow. They carry the banners and they do what they're told when they believe passionately in something. And lots of people believe passionately at one time about anti-nuclear stuff and so on, and the carry on with nuclear weaponry, and the cost of it all, and the threat of it all. But it doesn't occur to most of them that these organizers at the top have a different agenda. And yeah, they are used by all sides. All sides. But what happened to them all? Well, they branched them off into NGOs, non-government organizations. They're then used by those who control the agenda. I can remember too, and you don't have any marches against the starvation of the people dying in Iraq at the time. That didn't happen, did it? You didn't have them marching when they were out there bombing Libya. Didn't happen there, anyway. And it's the same thing with the massive protests that went on about globalism. And lots of students and so on would be all directed to protest the meeting places and when they held these international meetings. And I can remember one in, I think it was Canada, where the people that were actually filmed inside the meeting, looking down from this office complex down to the street level at the protests, and saying, we'll have to get them on board with us, the leaders. Why don't we ask them in? And they did. They asked the leaders in, and those leaders were bought over on the spot, pretty well, and given big bucks and salaries as being new NGOs, and they could then use all their followers, all the sheep, for the purposes of the true master here, the master of the dollar. Yeah. And that's what happened to them all. That's why you don't see these anti-globalist marches anymore. It doesn't happen. It's always been the story of it, isn't it? Just buy them off, buy them off, buy them off. Give them offers they find incredibly hard, perhaps, to refuse. Therefore, getting back to the propaganda right now, and the soap operas that you're given for news, it's incredible stuff, isn't it? Incredible stuff. They have sex involved, just like a drama, just like any drama. And you've got hookers of all kinds too. You had the same thing with hookers and Stormy Daniels and all that. Yep, all the makings of a good soap opera. And angry women and angry guys getting accused and lawyers involved and yada yada yada. Going back to an age from the 60s and 70s on, where you had what was called sexual liberation and the sexual revolution. Drugs, sex, rock and roll. Getting pushed not from the bottom, but from the top. So they're going to rehash all the stuff that happened back then when they don't like, supposedly, this person or that. It's all staged drama. It's the greatest diversion the States has had for a long time, and the world, to get away from the articles I've just read about the coming wars. Great, isn't it? You must admit it. CD sex. But let's not look at the agreements that Merkel has made with Pompeo and to be part of the coalition for invasion, etc. Don't look at that. And it tells you it's going to happen, doesn't it? It certainly does. And this time they're going to fulfill the rest of that part of the list for the Middle East, for the neocons. They've got to do it. They don't want to have to go through this again and again and again. Their Groundhog Day. They've got to get it done once and for all. So they don't have to give you even better soap operas to divert you when they start it all, so you don't look at what's really happening. How easy it is, isn't it? How darned easy it is. I mentioned this years and years ago on a show about psychology and how they kind of laugh in a sense with each intake they'd have of students when they could show a sock puppet, literally a puppet on your hand or on your hand being used to make a baby laugh. Because as long as there's two eyes painted on it, the baby naturally will look at it and think it's a person, you see. That's how easy it is. And how they laughed at how easy it is to fool humans, even for whatever age they are. Well, we're getting that all the time now for adults, aren't we? Aren't we ever? And evil, nasty things are afoot. I couldn't believe it in a sense. The character, well, I can. It's hard though. You can't get in. You can't really identify with psychopaths. It's difficult. Because they really have a show of emotion, because they watch how other folk act in situations. They try and copy that emotion, or the display of it, I should say. But they don't really feel it at all. But you think about these people who stand around, stand around maps, war maps and so on, and work out all the different collateral damage that would be caused by it all. And destruction. Etc., etc. And then just behind them, they've got all the big military economists planning, shares, etc. And then you have politicians in the States. It's open with the law that passed a few years ago, with the congressional insider trading. So when they hear something's coming up, they can start investing incredibly well with all the weaponry that's going to be used and then used up, because they must replace all the stuff they use. It's fantastic business. So think about all these people sitting there or standing there, the psychopaths, planning it all and shooting each other on. Good buddies. No conscience, eh? No conscience. Well, who's going to come to your help? To help you? Who's going to come to help you if your government turns on you? Like H.G. Wells said, that they'd have to destroy the family unit, so therefore government can talk right down to Joe Blow and tell you what to do, and there's no one standing around you to help you out. Even for moral support. What will you do when your government says, well, we don't really want to treat you for this illness or that illness or whatever it happens to be. It's more cost effective just to have you exit the world gracefully. Take this little pill that costs 25 cents and do the decent thing. Go on. Bye-bye. It's the same mentality behind the wars and their cost effectiveness and their profit margins, etc. They're coming for everybody in their planned, utopian, socialist, specialist-run system. That's what you have. I've read the articles here recently about some Canadas are leading the charge. I've read even the nudge units that even nudged the doctors not to prescribe help for their patients and cutting back and off, in fact, antibiotics. And then the breakdowns of statistics. Oh, certain folk over this age, over that age, with this particular disease, don't give them all the treatments. We'll save a lot of money this way. Nudge units, they call them, professional psychological departments aimed at fooling, deceiving and convincing the public just to obey. And as I say, do the decent thing. Here, take this pill. There you go. How's that? The same warfare is upon the whole populations of each country. As the leaders or owners of your countries, I call them owners, is more appropriate, have on their upcoming wars across any other country. That's the truth of it. And how can any country ever claim they have moral high ground when they've tossed all morality out the window? And even their old religions they've kicked out the window because it's in the way. It's disconcerting to have guilt trips pushed upon you for breaking natural laws. Who needs that when you want to go into to rape, pillage, and destroy? And profit mightily. How can you possibly claim moral high ground when you have nothing in this day and age to back you up on your morality? There's nothing out there. You're given a replacement of what used to be the family unit and morality or religion of any kind. You're giving up a replacement of winners and losers. And that's what you'll see, no doubt, on television. Winners and losers with all your reality shows and so on. For you to all copy. But don't forget, as you're doing it, the real rulers are training the ones that'll help you be the loser. Remember too, folks, I've got the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com for sale. You can also donate to help me tick along here. And you can do so by going to cuttingthroughthematrix.com website. List the other sites I have there, because sometimes I often think that one might go down. If it does, you'll still get my material. And it tells you how to donate as well, or pay for the books, etc. And you can send a check, remember, or an international postal money order to order books or whatever from other countries. And you, from inside Canada, naturally, you don't need an international money order, but from other countries you certainly do. Or you can send cash even. Checks, cash, money order, and that'll get to me. You don't have to either. You don't have to put expedite post, just general post. It will get to me. It doesn't get lost. It's been awfully good for over these years. And you find too, if you actually put anything down for expediting to get here in 2 or 3 days, it'll take maybe 4 or 5 days. If you don't expedite it, it's a lot cheaper. And it often won't be even stopped at customs. Customs likes to stop things that thinks, well, the person thinks it's important, it might be valuable. We can get a cut off this. Because that's how they get their money for opening things. So don't just send it in normal packaging or envelopes or whatever it happens to be, and it'll get to me without a problem. Take the cheapest way. But remember what I said, though. Think for yourselves. Because we are losing our compassion and our decency. We truly are. On by design, I think, really. And if we do that, we won't stand up for anybody, or our neighbours or anybody else. And that's what your rulers really want. Because they have big plans in the eugenical field for all of us. I'm Alan Watt from Ontario, Canada, and it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.